The stale, air-conditioned air of the restaurant felt heavy in my lungs. Across the small, linen-draped table, my husband of 12 years, Mark, was talking. His voice was a familiar, low hum, detailing the mundane complexities of a new project at his architecture firm. I watched his lips move, forming words about load-bearing walls and client revisions, but my focus wasn't on the story. It was on his hands. They were never still. His right hand held a fork, but he wasn't using it to eat. Instead, he was tracing the intricate pattern on the handle, over and over, his thumb wearing an invisible path on the cold silver. His left hand rested on the table, and his fingers were engaged in a frantic, silent tap dance, index, middle, ring, pinky, a staccato rhythm of anxiety against the white tablecloth. Tap, 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 tap. Pause. Tap, 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 tap. So, I told Henderson we'd have the revised blueprints by Thursday, he said, his eyes meeting mine for a fraction of a second before darting away, towards the flickering candle between us. That's good, honey, I replied, my voice sounding automated, a pre-recorded message from a wife who was supposed to be listening. I took a sip of my water, the ice cubes clinking a hollow accompaniment to his nervous symphony. This wasn't the Mark I new. The Mark I married was grounded, solid. His hands were the steady ones that held mine during both childbirths, the confident ones that could assemble a complicated IKEA bookshelf without glancing at the instructions twice. They were the calm, warm hands that rested on my back, a silent promise of safety. These hands, these fluttering, restless things, belonged to a stranger. The suspicion hadn't arrived as a thunderclap. It had seeped in, like a slow, cold draft under a door. It started about 2 months ago with the phone. He'd never been precious about his phone. It used to lie around the house, buzzing with group texts from his college friends or notifications from his sports apps. Then, suddenly, it was glued to his person. He took it to the bathroom. He slept with it under his pillow. And if it did happen to be on the coffee table and a notification lit up the screen, his body would tense, a hawk spotting movement in the grass. Then there were the late nights. Henderson's riding us hard on this new commercial complex, he'd say, his voice laced with a convincing weariness. Gotta put in the hours if we want to land this account. I'd nod, make him a coffee for the road, and try to ignore the faint, unfamiliar scent of a floral perfume that sometimes clung to his jacket, a scent distinctly different from my own vanilla and sandalwood soap. But I'd pushed those things down, buried them under a mountain of rationalizations. He was stressed. I was being paranoid. After 12 years and 2 kids, a little distance was normal, wasn't it? We were in a rut, that was all. Tonight's dinner was supposed to be our way out of that rut. A Friday night, the kids at my mom's, a reservation at this nice, new Italian place we'd been meaning to try. I'd worn the blue dress he always said he liked, the one that brought out the color of my eyes. I'd hoped the familiar ambiance of a date night would bring back the familiar Mark. Instead, his nervous hands were telling me a different story. A story his words were desperately trying to conceal. He reached for his wine glass, and I saw a slight tremor in his fingers. The rich, red liquid shivered, a tiny earthquake in a crystal lake. You seem on edge tonight, Mark, I said, keeping my tone light, conversational. I speared a piece of grilled asparagus, trying to appear nonchalant. His head snapped up. On edge? No, just tired. Like I said, this project is a beast. He forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. They were the color of a stormy sky, and right now, they were full of shadows. How's your salmon? It's good, I said, though I could barely taste it. The tap, tap, tap of his fingers was drilling a hole in my composure. He launched into another story about a difficult contractor, his words coming a little too fast, a little too polished, like he'd rehearsed them. I nodded along, but my mind was racing, connecting the dots I'd been trying so hard to ignore. The phone, the late nights, the perfume, and now, these hands, these betraying, trembling hands. A memory flashed, unbidden, from 6 months ago. We'd been watching a crime drama, and the detective said, the body always betrays the lie. Watch the hands. Liars can't control their hands. Mark had chuckled, pulling me closer. Good thing I'm a terrible liar, then, he'd said, kissing my forehead. You'd always know. The irony was a physical pain in my chest. He excused himself to go to the restroom, pushing his chair back a little too abruptly. I watched him walk away, his posture rigid. The moment he disappeared around the corner, I felt a strange, magnetic pull towards his side of the table. His phone was there, face down next to his plate. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. This was it, the moment of truth. I could pick it up, try his passcode, probably our anniversary, or the kids' birthdays. I could know, for sure, in an instant. But my hands remained in my lap, clenched into tight fists. I was terrified of what I would find. The not knowing was a special kind of agony, but the knowing would be a different kind of hell, one from which there was no return. He came back, his face freshly splashed with water, tiny droplets clinging to his temples. He saw me looking at his phone and a flicker of panic crossed his features before he mastered it. He casually picked it up and slipped it into his pants pocket. "So," he said, sitting down. "What should we do for dessert?" The tiramisu looked good. He was trying to steer the ship back to safe, mundane waters. But the ship was already taking on water, and I was the only one who could hear the groan of the sinking hull. "Mark," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. I looked directly at him, refusing to let his gaze escape. "Is there something you want to tell me?" The effect was instantaneous. His face went pale. The carefully constructed facade of casual fatigue crumbled, revealing the raw panic beneath. His hands, which had been momentarily still, flew into action. One went to his water glass, adjusting its position by a millimeter. The other began shredding the corner of his paper napkin, tearing it into tiny, confetti-like pieces. "Tell you," he repeated, his voice cracking on the second word. What would I need to tell you, Sarah?" He was looking at me, but his eyes were wide, unseeing. He was a trapped animal. And his hands were the frantic scratching at the walls of the trap. The napkin was now a pile of white scraps. His right hand started drumming again, this time on his own thigh, a frantic, hidden rhythm. In that moment, I didn't need to see his phone. I didn't need to hire a private investigator or find a lipstick stain on his collar. The evidence was right there, dancing in the candlelight. His nervous hands were a confession more eloquent, more damning, than any string of words could ever be. They were screaming the truth while his mouth stuttered out denials. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. He ordered tiramisu, and I watched him push the cocoa-dusted layers around his plate, taking one, maybe two, small bites. The conversation was dead, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. We were two ghosts sitting at a table, the gulf between us wider than the entire restaurant. The car ride home was worse. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white bone. The silence was broken only by the hum of the engine and the soft thump, thump, thump of the turn signal. I stared out the window at the passing streetlights, each one a fleeting, orange tear streaking down the night. The life we had built together, the house with the wraparound porch, the two car seats in the back, the photo of us laughing on the beach in Florida that was his phone's wallpaper for years, it all felt like it was dissolving, pixel by pixel. We pulled into the driveway of our dark, quiet house. He turned off the engine, but neither of us moved. "Sarah," he began, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name, remorse, fear, or just sheer exhaustion from the weight of his lie. "Don't," I whispered, my hand on the door handle. "Just, don't say anything." I got out and walked to the front door, my legs feeling like they were made of wood. I heard his door open and close, his footsteps following me up the path. We went inside. The familiar scent of our home, lemon polish and the faint, sweet smell of the kids' stuffed animals, hit me like a physical blow. It was the smell of our life, a life that, as of tonight, I knew was a carefully constructed fiction. I didn't turn on the lights. I walked straight to the kitchen, needing space, needing a barrier. He followed, hovering in the doorway. "It's not what you think," he said, the classic, cliché line of every guilty person. I turned around, the dim light from the street lamp outside filtering through the window, illuminating his face. "What do I think, Mark?" My voice was dangerously calm. "Tell me what I think." He opened his mouth, then closed it. His hands were at his sides, but they were clenched into fists, then released, then clenched again. The silence stretched, taut as a wire. And then, he broke. His shoulders slumped, and a ragged, shuddering sigh escaped him. He leaned against the doorframe, as if his legs could no longer support him. He didn't look at me. He stared at the floor. "Her name is Chloe," he whispered. The name hung in the dark kitchen, a simple, two-syllable bomb that shattered my world. Chloe. It sounded young, pretty. I said nothing. I just stood there, my arms wrapped around myself, waiting. "She's a junior designer at the firm," he continued, the words tumbling out now, low and rushed. "It started a few months ago. Just lunches. Then, it became more. I don't I don't know how it happened, Sarah. I swear I don't. He was finally speaking, finally using words, but they were meaningless, pathetic noises. They were just the subtitles to a movie I had already seen. The real story, the truth of his guilt, his fear, his betrayal, had been playing out for weeks in the silent, frantic language of his hands. I thought of all the times I'd seen those signs, the tapping, the trembling, the way he couldn't meet my eyes, and had explained them away. I had been an accomplice in my own deception, because the truth was too terrible to face. How long? I asked, my voice a dry leaf scraping on pavement. 4 months, he said, his voice barely audible. 4 months. A third of a year. While I was helping our son, Liam, with his science project on volcanoes, and teaching our daughter, Emily, how to tie her shoes, he was with Chloe. While I was worrying about mortgage payments and parent-teacher conferences, he was building a secret life. He started to cry, quiet, messy sobs that shook his broad frame. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I'm so sorry. It was a mistake. A terrible, stupid mistake. I watched him, this man I had loved for over a decade, this man I had built a family with, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness. Just a vast, hollow emptiness. The person I thought he was had already left, and this crying, broken man in my kitchen was just the shell he'd left behind. I think you should leave, I said, my tone flat, final. He looked up, his face streaked with tears. Sarah, please, we can fix this. We can go to counseling. I'll end it, I swear. Tonight. You should have ended it 4 months ago, I said. Before you brought the smell of her perfume into our home. Before your hands started telling me stories you were too much of a coward to say out loud. The mention of his hands seemed to startle him. He looked down at them, as if seeing them for the first time, the very instruments of his betrayal. Go, Mark, I said, turning my back on him. I heard him stand there for a long moment, his ragged breathing the only sound. Then, I heard his footsteps retreating down the hall. A few minutes later, I heard the soft click of the guest bedroom door closing. I stood in the dark kitchen for a long time, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. I walked over to the kitchen table and ran my hand over its smooth, wooden surface. This was where we ate breakfast every morning as a family. This was where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays. This was where life happened. And now, it was where my marriage had ended. Not with a dramatic fight or a slammed door, but with the silent, desperate testimony of my husband's nervous hands. They had told me a story of infidelity long before his lips could form the words, and in doing so, they had taught me the most painful lesson of my life, that the truth doesn't always need a voice. Sometimes, it just needs a pair of trembling hands, dancing their terrible, silent confession in the flickering light of a candle.